My dear friends, it's amazing and astonishing to see you. As always, I'm your dear friend Stephen Clements, a writer, a gamer, and an appreciator of big brain activities in general. And on this channel, I perform dramatic story readings, provide role-playing game and movie reviews, and I get to talk to interesting people. And in this episode, I'm hitting a trifecta. I'm talking to an interesting person about a role-playing game based on a movie. Now, if only we did a dramatic reading of Hawk the Slayer in the process, we'd get all four. Ambition. And in this episode, I'm talking to Jonathan Himes, the writer of Slay the Hawker, the RPG adventure module based on the classic sword and sorcery movie Hawk the Slayer. If you haven't seen my recent review of that module, check it out. It'll enrich your enjoyment of this interview, but you'll be able to have a good time even without it. And as you can tell from my review of Slay the Hawker, there's not a whole lot available online about the module, its creation, or what people have done with it. Well, I'm helping to address some of that knowledge gap about this product, its creator, and the inspirations that went into the game design by doing this interview. So we can learn what his thoughts and techniques were and maybe incorporate those into our own game design decisions. Because great ideas rarely emerge in a vacuum. They usually come from interplay amongst a whole bunch of different people bouncing ideas off each other. So let's see what Jonathan Himes has to say about the creation and adventure design of Slay the Hawker. My dear friends, welcome, dear friend Jonathan Himes, to the show because, as promised, I'm getting you the mind of the creator of Slay the Hawker. And let's see what darkness dwells within. Jonathan, how you doing?
Good, real good. Excited to talk about this.
It's such a unique book, from the concept to what you did with it to all kinds of other factors. I was very interested to get your insights into several different facets of this work. So let's just start with the most basic thing. What inspired you to make a prequel module for the kind of glam disco
Mhm.
fantasy adventure movie Hawk the Slayer?
Yeah, I once punched a bloke for saying Hulk the Slayer is rubbish. And I stand by that. I mean, I have loved this cheesy, campy movie since I was about 8 years old, and it's always stayed with me. I think when I was 12, I wrote a 40-page novella on it. And in 2018, I started making a little text adventure game, kind of like one of those old vintage computer games, more like Wizardry because it's a parser RPG, not like Zork, but it's turn-based and it's got lavish purple prose because I'm a literature professor. And that won a Best in Show ribbon at an international festival. So it's easy for me because I just live in the world of Hawk the Slayer. It's got, to me, it's just the quintessential D&D party, you know, elf, dwarf, a giant who's really just a tall guy, a druidic woman of the woods, a one-armed crossbowman, essentially a man at arm, if you will. And this movie was a forerunner. I mean, it was the first of its kind, the first full-length sword and sorcery film, even predating Conan the Barbarian and Dragon Slayer. It came out like a year after Star Wars, so it's got a medieval Darth Vader played by Jack Palance, just chewing up the scenery.
Yeah.
It's got a medieval Luke Skywalker with a medieval lightsaber, essentially, controlled by the last elfin mind stone. And it's just, I don't know, it's totally cheesy, but it works. I don't think people give the film enough credit. I think the brilliance of it is that it's got pseudo-Elizabethan dialect and the disco flute soundtrack, which was actually written by Harry Robertson, who did a lot of the soundtracks for those Hammer horror films. And I think he lent it that convincing dialogue, that Elizabethan kind of tone, which is kind of neat because most fantasy movies don't try to be period. They just talk with modern slang and stuff. And they do it with a straight face. It's like they spent all the budget on Jack Palance and they said, you know what, we're doing this anyway. We're going to make this epic. To me, it's got the same charm that like Flash Gordon had, came out of, in the early 80s. It's like Dito De Laurentiis wanted this epic space opera like Buck Rogers or Star Wars. And the cast were like, what kind of movie are we making again? And they were, Brian Blessed is convinced that it is the most epic thing he ever did, So I love that tension between the camp and the dead seriousness. They deliver it. It's just a perfect performance.
So you've been stuck with this story in your head ever since you were a kid. and you've actually done things with it on your own time and on your own dime. And so, how did you get the opportunity to turn this into a published module people could play in?
Yeah. So, I mean, I had such a blast making this ridiculously big mammoth text adventure game, but it's a niche audience. Nobody's going to be playing text adventures, turn-based text adventures. I mean, that's just not where the money's to be made. People aren't looking at that. And it was a bucket list thing for me, and I put everything I had into it. I think it's brilliant. I'm a little biased, but I just wanted a little bit wider readership. And about that time, I was getting back into RPGs. I was watching a lot of Professor Dungeon Master, DM Scotty, and I saw Professor DM's collaboration on Macbeth, the adaptation of Shakespeare. And I just thought maybe I could do that. So I pitched to Scotty and Gareth, Quest Givers is their company. And I just said, I've got this computer text adventure based on Hawk the Slayer. I would love to turn that into a tabletop game. And they said, yeah, make it a trilogy. So the computer game I made was the sequel to the film, but I made this as the prequel.
Huh. Okay, so you're looking at a trilogy. So we've got a prequel. Are you going to make an equal and then a
Yeah,
sequel, or are you going to make
yeah.
two sequels?
Yeah, the second game, which I have play tested a few times now, is closer to the film. And that will satisfy fans who just love the film and they want, especially the guys who want to play Hawk or Balden the dwarf or even, Gort the giant. People who are fans of the film will get that a little bit of an experience. Yeah.
Okay, we're going to do all three. Okay, we're going to book in the movie
Mhm.
and do that. That's pretty cool. Now, the module and I imagine the equal and the sequel are going to be system agnostic. So, what was the design decision to go with no given system? While I understand it makes the adventure more portable, but it also creates more work for the DM because now they have to insert a bunch of mechanics and stats and this and that. What was the
Yeah.
thought process there?
Yeah. So Quest Givers, that's kind of one of their distinctives. And Scotty explained it to me, DM Scotty and Gareth, but I remember Scotty saying that it makes them evergreen and regardless of what system or edition you're using, these modules never go out of date. They don't become obsolete. I understand that thought that it seems like it makes more work. But I mean, for me as a GM, I always have to prep and I always have to tweak to make any particular module work for my ongoing campaign. And even if I'm running a one shot, I mean, I got to prime the pump and get my head back in the procedural rules that I use or the setting. And I just don't have the neuroplasticity I had now that I'm in my 50s. And I really agree with Seth Skorkowski too, that he does a lot of vintage TSR module reviews. And he says you have to make them your own. If you're going to run that thing, it has to make sense to you. It always involves some legwork, taking the parts that are kind of nonsensical, or there's always gaps or things that just don't fit your ongoing campaign. And maybe there's poor NPC motives, plot points that just make these big leaps. And so I don't have that much problem. I now strive for more of an open box, sandbox kind of game. And so I now do things that Dungeon Tubers said were anathema. Like I'm not averse to flipping and checking up a rule. I have my 1981 Moldvay that I've had since I was 10 years old right at my elbow, and I've got it all mentally bookmarked. It's no big deal. And I play with people that don't mind that as long as I'm not taking 10 minutes. I can just flip and check, okay, there's the stat block I need. And most people who are playing these modules, they know their system pretty well, whether they've got their DM screen with things taped to it or I use a lot of flashcards for the procedures that I use on a consistent basis. So I just don't see that as an impediment to me. If you know your favorite system and you know it well, you know what goblins do. And the module does tell you what the powers of the bad guys are. It just doesn't dictate to you how much HP and AC and HD. I mean, why should I tell you how to run it at your table? I don't agree that it's more work because I always have to prep and I have to tweak any module to work for the conventions of me and my players. Yeah, this is where I'm going to get all into dungeon design and theory and stuff. So just tell me to stop.
Okay, we'll stop then. Back to the movie. So it was historical fantasy from my recent rewatching of it because it did incorporate what was clearly recognizable as some historical elements, but it also added fantastical elements as well. Whereas the module is strict high fantasy. But I noticed that you did a significant amount of world building around it. Like you gave explanations for why the place is how it is. There's some sort of mystical barrier that's been put up and a dark energy, chaos energy, I believe it is. that comes in, and there's a lot more humanoids and monsters than the movie would lead you to think is native to the setting. So why change the setting other than changing copywritten character names? That makes complete sense. I get that. And what guided the directions you took the setting details in?
Hmm. Yeah, I can see why you say it seems like more like historical fantasy. I mean, you got the High Abbot of Danesford and the fat coffers of the Holy Fortress, as Voltaire says, the medievalism. But alongside that, you also have typical tropes of heroic fantasy, the elf, the dwarf, the druidic woman. You have a typical D&D party, teleportation. I know there are elements of historical medievalism, but if I'm writing, if I'm rewriting this for tabletop RPG play, I need to lean a little more on the fantasy side. You're right, the film doesn't have monsters. If we want to get together and play D&D, we kind of need, some goblin type creatures. DM Scotty and Gareth all already kind of had their own quest givers creature, which is goblin like. And so we worked that in the goblinoid in my draft. And just to satisfy your thirst for D&D adventures for one thing, but also if this, I'm thinking as a designer, if I'm making this truly system agnostic or neutral, we have to have things that make sense for 5e players as well as OSR players and whatever system you favor. There has to be a reason why there's only one elf around and why one dwarf and why people are so prejudiced against the witch, the woman, as Hawk calls her. What does she have to do with the religion? Some way to explain all that, to limit and constrain it, because I think a lot of modern role players are used to Kung Fu Panda, anything goes. And there has to be a world building that kind of contains it. So, and actually, my friend, we play tested the heck out of this, the entire module 3 summers ago. And my DM, who ran it for me as a player, I got to be the player. He's a total 5e fanatic. He noticed that it was kind of like in Ravenloft, that world is surrounded by this fog that you can't get out until you defeat Strahd. So I didn't have that in mind when I made it. I was just trying to figure out how would this all make sense, the conditions that are in the film that constrain what players might be used to, whatever system they're in. It's low magic, it's high church, and yet there's arcane powers and people don't approve of this woman. Are all of the religious people bigots and just idiots? No. It's fun to lean into stereotypes, but I think when you foil them, that also gives you role-playing opportunities. And I wanted that woman to be part of the mystery. There's a lot of funny things about the film that gave me an opportunity to fill out the backstory. So I took my cue from the flashbacks mainly, and that's how I created this prequel. Plus, there's the novelization of the film. This is a must-have if you're a fan of Hawk the Slayer. It's not like a lot of other novelizations of the movie. It does adhere pretty faithfully to it, but there's just a lot more that it seems more like a source text, and it's got entire chapters that don't make it into the film.
Hmm.
But there's never any mention of Hawk's mother. You've got Hawk, his brother, and their father. How did they have a falling out? Why is there no mother in existence? What happened? How did she disappear? Maybe that has something to do with the sibling rivalry. Maybe it has something to do with the witch, the weird witch that Hawk calls her mother at certain points. So I'm trying to me, those weird things are that's my way in. As Lewis and Tolkien said, I mean, when you see somebody that has a story that you love that's botched, you rewrite that. And those gaps and those weird things that need explaining, that's your opportunity as a writer. You write into the gaps, as Tom Shippey said, one of the world's leading Tolkien experts. So that's what I was trying to do. I just think all of these are opportunities. How does that witch play into what happened to Hawk and his mom? Is she to blame? Who do you side with in this? I think all of that is essential to a satisfying fantasy game.
I hear you. And
Yeah.
I did pick up on you use the name Magenta at one point in the module. I know where that came from because I'm a Rocky Horror Picture Show fan. So here's my
Yeah.
fan theory tying both Hawk the Slayer and Rocky Horror Picture Show together is that this, in fact, takes place in the galaxy of Transexia. And the witch becomes Magenta and teleports to the castle and then eventually is killed by a crazed transvestite and the floor show.
Yeah, I put some Easter eggs in there, and I was hoping people would catch on. So not to
If you
that
like
extent, but
if you like Easter eggs, it's a great module for it because they're peppered throughout it. Yeah, there was a few points where I was reading it and my wife was next to me. I was like, I think this guy just did this to me. It gave me some laughs.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
well, thank you for that. And another thing from the movie that stood out versus what's in the game is that the movie had Christianity pretty overtly in it. There were crosses, the religious figures were recognizable folks from at least stereotypical mythological Christian orders. There's references to God. So why change that in the module to a more generic fantasy polytheistic situation?
I can't really take full credit for that. I did take a cue from, again, the book because the woman, she's called Mina, and I just made that into Magenta. But, her backstory is that she tells Hawk she's from another world also, like the PCs are entering this.
So I was right. My transsexia theory has got legs to it. I didn't even read the book.
Well, she kind of explains in the book, and I do kind of work it into the module that her world was destroyed by fire and water, and she's been specially gifted with second sight. Somehow she made it into this world, and she's kind of an outcast and a misfit, not tolerated in this world either, but she feels sent here for a reason by the guardian spirit, as she calls it. Again, I feel like that is a way to take what the film has got and make it work with a system neutral game because we're not playing historical fantasy here, but people are used to dealing with deities. And it's got this, it allows for that complicated position that she has in society where I don't want to give too many spoilers here, but if you've seen the movie that she and Hawk have a true alliance. She is a good guy. And I'm spoiling it. I'm sorry, but
Well, it's like a 40-year-old movie. We're
yeah.
past the spoiler safety zone.
But if you're a player in the game, part of the fun is figuring out how she fits into this milieu. And you have to decide is she to blame or why does she seem to have this alliance with Hawk, with the good guys, if arcane people are suspect and oppressed usually? Why is Lord Slade, Falcon's father, that's the counterpart to Hawk? Falcon Slade is Hawk the Slayer, and his father, they're the paladins and they uphold righteousness. They are the clerical people in society who uphold law and order. They should be against her. But why? Why? Well, not all religious people are idiots. I mean, he kind of stands against the tide of public opinion. And but why? And that's the question. That's part of the mystery of the game is you do a little bit of social deduction within the overall game and investigation. You go to the church, you go to the woods. There are these side quests that you can pursue that support the main events that you're playing out. The module takes place in 7 days of feastal traditions leading up to the wedding on day 7. Part of the fun is figuring out what's really going on and who to side with. You can bypass as much of that as you want. I wanted to be as open-ended as possible, like I did with my computer text game, so that you feel like you've got as much agency as you want.
I think it succeeded in that. Speaking of layout philosophy, I found that the material was interesting to read, but hard on the eyes. I
Yeah.
had a real slow go through this thing, and there's reasons that texts are presented in different manners depending on how you want people to uptake them. And this was a different layout than I was used to.
Hmm.
The flow was interrupted constantly. And
Hmm.
so it was taxing on my attention span, and I usually got a pretty good one of those. Do you have any idea why this book was laid out the way it was laid out? Does it harken back to your text-based adventure design? Was that what influenced this, or is this something else?
This is another Quest Giver's distinctive, the publisher. My biggest gripe is the font is really so tiny. I do know that the initial printer that he was setting this up with had a page limit of 70 pages. So I know that factored into it. And Gareth, I worked close. DM Scotty did a lot of the internal artwork, but I collaborated on a lot of the gamification and dialogue, especially with Gareth. And he is just that was such a pleasure to work with him. I would do it again anytime. And he kept pushing me to add more dialogue so that the game is player facing. You don't have that was his big design philosophy is Gareth would not allow me to have all this information that is behind and only accessible to the GM. Quest givers want their modules to be player facing so that everything is interactable and you should be able to lay it down and run it in real time. I just think the more familiar with any module you are beforehand, the better. But ostensibly, you should be able to to run a Quest Givers module that way. He said most modules, whether they're 5e or vintage TSR, no modules really do a good job of telling you how to actually sit down at the table and play a game, run a game. This gives you in chronological order what to do next, what checks to do, where to go to find the next, little plot point. So in a way, it's kind of set up like a solo RPG. People are fond of, Four Against Darkness and systems like that. And I did it that way. This is their magnum opus. This is what convinced me and won me over to that format that you're talking about. I admit, Stephen, it is an acquired taste, but I'm a programmer, I'm a coder. I taught tech writing for many years, so I'm kind of used to being able to apprehend the page layout and intuit what it means. And I think it's an intuitive approach once you see what they're doing. But this magnum opus of Quest Givers, the North Road, is like 16 modules in one, and it shows you that same layout of how to run the modules. Instead of spelling out, here's what this is, you kind of get used to, oh, this is what you read to the players because it's color coded. Here's what the DM might narrate. Here's the part that tells you where to go. And it is laid out more or less chronologically, but it may reference you to a subheading. If the players opt to do this thing that was presented on day one, you go back to that title.
I imagine that running it at the table, it's very well set up for that. It's very much structured for the if-then statement
Yeah.
flow. And
Yeah.
so finding what you need to find, really easy. But if you're just reading it for pleasure or just trying to get your first read through of it prior to running it, it was a pain. It was a slog because I would get started and the font and page color were not in good sync. So that was hard on the eyes. You said the font was tiny. So I would get done with one box and then breaking my attention, have to go to another one, breaking my attention on and on and on. So that was tough. But at the table, I imagine it's pretty darn easy,
Yeah.
which is its own value. So a lot of things are trade-offs in life. So do
Yeah.
you want easy flowing descriptive texts that when you're actually running it, you have a hard time finding the detail you needed for that moment, or do you want this? So, okay, that makes more sense to me now.
I will say this is better edited than I will guarantee you than any other Quest Givers module because I did my dead level. You can be sure. One thing I'm good at is grammar, but yeah, there are some things that did slip through because I couldn't directly insert those. I had to do it on my end and then submit all the changes constantly.
I
So
hear
yeah.
you. Yeah. And some always get through no matter what, no matter how many times. So I get that. Is there anything else that you think folks should know about this module, your design philosophy and going with it? Or do you have a particularly standout play experience from the table that you've had from running or apparently happily playing in it?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So my players and also the group that ran it through 5e and at cons, when I do it as a one-shot version, it takes some of the set piece battles and some of the side quests, and makes them into a compressed story arc. The things that people consistently really praise and enjoy are like there is the first night that you spend in the castle, the keep of Hawk and his family. The party is wiped out and tired. They have troubled sleep and they have these weird dreams. And this is something I was inspired by Macbeth, where Professor DM has you give each player a prompt, and they have to get the intel and then role play out the sharing of what they know. And I do that with a dream. That night they have this feverish dream which foretells things that might happen in the game, some clues, but I collect those dream cards back before they role play it out. And that simulates what it's like when you're trying to recall the details of a dream. I bungle it a little bit. It gives them a fair warning of what might happen, what might lie ahead in the game. So they might be watching for certain things. But it's part of the mystery. Like, when am I going to see that thing? Is that real or not? How do I trust my own dream? So people like that. It's got a strong start on this clifftop skirmish overlooking the sea. They see a maiden on a mare galloping up the incline, being pursued by her fiance, Falcon Slade, who is Hawk the Slayer. And she gets at the to the summit and yanked behind a standing stone by a web, and then he jumps off to rescue her. I've never had a group of players who didn't want to go to the rescue, and
I was wondering if you had many players that were like, ah, it's not my problem. It's over there.
I've I've had
Because
one,
like
yeah,
one did
one bystander, yeah, but I mean, almost everybody. I think I can think
good.
of one guy who didn't.
Good. Well, that kind of restores my faith in players because I've seen a distressing amount of folks do the opposite. So that's good. When there's a maiden in distress, they
Right.
will ride to it. So if it's
Yeah.
just some dude, they might not care, but a maiden in distress. Okay, got
Right, right, right.
it.
And that kind of sets you up for like the whole premise of the game that this is the couple, and it helps you win your sympathy that they're trying to get married, and you got to protect this marriage because it'll fulfill this prophecy to prevent all the chaos agents spilling over, and it sets you up for the movie too. It explains where did these chaos dark robed wizards come from in the first place, you know? There's that. There's the catacombs crawl. There's like two dungeon crawls in it, which it's the same dungeon, but the floor plan shifts significantly based on what happens during the week of the leading up to the wedding, and that'll satisfy your tooth for dungeon crawls. I didn't make it up again. It's in the very opening sequence of the film where Voltan is taking the back door up to assassinate the father. The book kind of describes that as the secret way through the family catacombs. So I took my lead from that. There's my dungeon, right?
Ah, nice. I
You
like
know,
it. Well,
yeah,
cool. So apparently everybody needs to read the book. If you're a fan of either the
yeah.
module and or the movie, you also need to get the book.
Yeah, I think any fan would really enjoy it. The boar, there's a boar hunt, which is one of the side quests that you can take part in it or not, but people really like that. And again, I can't take the credit for the mechanics of it. I was inspired by Professor DM's Minotaur layer. He's got a video on how to run an unmappable space because of the disorientation you have. In my game, it's these wild boars that are kind of magical. They exude some kind of hormone that disorients you, and you can't map it, and you explore it with roll charts for events. And people really enjoy winding up in a tunnel and having to like set their spear and hoping that they gore the wild boar that charges you in the dark. You can't take torches in there because it's made of bramble. It's a thicket. It's a satisfying in fiction, unmappable space. It makes some interesting challenges.
Men crave the hunt. That's what I'm hearing out of this, and you're giving them that fantasy. It was
Yeah,
a cool encounter, by the way. I thought the hog was sufficiently horrifying to match the reputation. So
the horror boar, as it's
the
called.
horrible, yeah,
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 that was a legit threat. Well, all right, man. Well, I appreciate you taking some time to tell us about Slay the Hawker. And who
yeah.
knows, maybe we'll be back for the equal and the sequel. Thank you, sir.
Yeah, thanks a lot. It was great fun talking with you.
Now, wasn't that interesting? Ways to get in touch with Jonathan Himes I'm going to put in the description below, so reach out, say hi, send him fan mail, send him love mail, send him hate mail. He's an English professor, believe me. You can't shock him. But what did you think about our conversation? I'd love to hear your takes in the comments below. I read them all and I respond to them all. So hopefully you've enjoyed this tour through adventure design considerations and reminiscing about an iconic sword and sorcery flick from the 80s, which at some point I'm definitely going to review on here. Maybe I'll have Jonathan on to help me do it. It's really something. So that's what I've got for today, my dear friends. Until next time, I wish you nothing but the best.
All right.
There you are. Now I
Yeah.
see you. There
All
we go.
right.
There we go. Yeah,
Hot
you're right.
dog.
You are looking handsome. No,
Thank you.
I'm looking more handsome, or you. I don't know, but
I think
yeah,
our
it's good
handsomeness
hair day.
is just feeding off. Yes, yes.
Pre-interview limbering up or
Yeah.
testing out your vocals. Ah, you know.
Ooh, ah. Yes. I'm feeling it.